Hey, it's so nice to be here as part of this group and also with the honor of introducing John Edgar Wideman. But also I'm a little uncomfortable because I don't yet know exactly what I'm going to say. I have plan A. Plan A is, I got this list of all of John Edgar Wideman's awards, or some of them. There's like 20 of the most amazing awards. I'll take any one of them for my whole career. And he's got all these awards. It drives me crazy. And then I was going to say, I have written down here, Renaissance man. And he is, in fact, a real Renaissance man in the literary world. He writes incredible fiction, and he writes creative nonfiction, which is my field. He is a scholar and has written an award-winning historical fiction. He has started African American studies departments at major universities. He has been a Rhodes Scholar. He received a MacArthur Genius Award. I mean, come on, you know? Enough is enough. So I was going to tell you all that, but I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to mention another writer here, but John doesn't know this. We've known each other for a long, long time, but I think about him often. I'm from Pittsburgh. John has written a great deal about Pittsburgh, and just a week and a half ago, I did one of my I am looking for inspiration literary tours, and I went to this area, some of you are from Pittsburgh, called Point Breeze. Now, in Point Breeze is where Annie Dillard wrote her amazingly nice American childhood memoir. It's a wonderful, nice book. Everything about Point Breeze is nice. The library's nice, the book is nice, the houses are nice, the people are nice, everything is really nice, and it's a nice, nice book. But no, I love Annie, okay. But I stand on the railroad tracks. Like, there's the right side of the tracks, and then there's the other side of the tracks. And I stand on the railroad tracks, and this just kills me. It just kind of makes me shiver all over the place because on the other side of the tracks is Homewood, where John Edgar Wideman has made it come alive. And there are nice things about Homewood. It's a very interesting place. The people there remain, in many respects, kind of close. It is a family area in many respects, but also, I just talked to someone who 6 months ago heard this at Homewood. Pop, 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 pop. It's a different world. And I stand there in those tracks and I think about what John Edgar Wideman did in his Homeward trilogy, his fiction, and how powerful it is, and how he made it come alive for me and for so many of my students. That book and this other book that I still assign in my classes, Brothers and Keepers. And I find it quite thrilling. And when I think of, and moving, and when I think of John Edgar Wideman, I think of these three words that really kind of make him so powerful and so important. He is incredibly, unbelievably inspiring. When I say John Edgar Wideman to my MFA writing students, there's a pause because they appreciate his words so very much. And he is, as you will see, so amazingly intense. I love that intensity. I wish I had that intensity because he just drills right into you and kind of takes away all the barriers. But the final I word, he is a man, he is a writer, he is a scholar with incredible integrity. And this is so rare and so important in the writing world and in all worlds. Books like Brothers and Keepers, Farther Along, they tell the truth. They dig into you so deeply, so passionately, that you feel it and you remember those words for a long, long time. You can't forget, because you know this man is telling you the truth. There's no bullshit. There's just direct passion and honesty. And so I respect him, you might note. And so it is absolutely my pleasure and my honor to have this opportunity to introduce to you John Edgar Wideman.
Thank you, sir. It wasn't exactly a spontaneous introduction. I wrote it and asked Lee. And Lee is very, thank you, Lee. Thank you very much. And Lee will be speaking tomorrow at 9. And I've already passed on my regrets. I'm going to France. No regrets about going to France on the 8th, but I am, and so I can't be around. I have to go home and pack a suitcase and get on the road, Jack. But I'm very happy to be here this evening, and I'm floating now. I mean, anything I can say will be anticlimactic after that very thoughtful and kind introduction. But I have a couple things I want to share with you. Part of what I want to share is my admiration for your goals, for the path that many of you have taken, and that is as teachers and researchers. It's so important to remind young folk and remind ourselves that language can be used for something other than to sell things or to lie. And I'm afraid that the language is being consumed by those particular tasks, so that the language is always in danger of becoming something that we wouldn't want it to become. That is something that betrays us and doesn't pass on the best of what we know to the next generation. Anyway, I commend you for the teaching, for the organization, for the idea of the organization. It really hit me that a group would be dedicated to the best that's being written and thought about writing and about mathematics and how you pass that on and how you stay a community that has its own values and generates its own cadre of experts and expertise and texts and all that. So again, I commend you. You have, I think, as you received it because you paid your fees or whatever, a copy of what I'm going to read tonight, and it's called Writing Teacher. But before I do that, where are we tonight? We're in Baltimore. And whatever else you came here to do, or I came here to do, whatever we were scheduled to do, here we are. We're in Baltimore. And I think maybe last night a curfew was lifted. And so I would be very much remiss, and I would just feel awful if I came here and read something that I'd prepared a while ago and that was it. Then I left Baltimore. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to share something else short that I've written and I want to share with you. And then I will read Writing Teacher. But first, a piece, and it's in progress. It's called Amends. Amends. I'm pleased to see you all could attend this gathering. Thank you for coming out with such little advance notice. Some of you I recognized immediately because of the massive media coverage your cases have received. Mr. Garner, Mr. Brown, Mr. Gray, welcome. But I assure you, familiar or not to me, each and every one of you is equally welcome. The auditorium is overflowing but well lighted, and I can see clearly you represent all sizes, shapes, colors, ages. Yet you have all earned the distinction of being unarmed black men killed by white police. Or perhaps I should be more precise and say black males killed by white police, since some of you are children. No one, first and foremost me, your elected representative, is pleased about the fate you have suffered. It's a crying shame in this day and age to observe daily how certain citizens of our great nation are subjected to intolerable treatment. Thank you. Thank you for your applause and cheers, but gentlemen, please, take your seats again, please. We have serious business to conduct this morning. Yes, the nation has been afflicted with what might be called unfortunate bumps in the road to progress and prosperity. Those of us in charge, supremely me, regret these unacceptable, though perhaps unavoidable jostles. Allow me to speak bluntly and come directly to the point. I have taken notice of the problem and intend to rectify it. I promise to make amends. Given the immense resources of our nation and the high office I hold, no doubt to some folks I may appear to be omnipotent. A word, just in case some of you might not be familiar with it, means I can do anything I want to do, anytime, anywhere, to anybody. Yet despite my vast empowerment, I cannot restore to you the lives which were snatched away by police officers. In order to make amends for your loss, I am determined to offer each and every one of you an unprecedented opportunity. You will have the chance to meet your killers face to face in a touch football game. This remedy may seem a bit odd at first, especially considering how many of you there are and how many police. But be patient, my friends, and allow me to explain. Without stretching even a tiny bit the authority entrusted to me, I have arranged all necessary details of the impending match: arena, rules, referees, sponsors, global televising rights of the event. Who wouldn't pay to watch you fellows perform on that great American leveler, the ball field? The world will be watching as you compete with your assailants. No holds barred. Only this time, no weapons. Simply all of them versus all of you. Mano a mano, till one side cries, no mas. Thank you. Thank you. I am profoundly grateful for your enthusiasm, your vote of confidence, but let's settle down, men. And please excuse me a moment. As you regain your places, I must attend to this note my assistant just handed me. Oh my. I'm afraid I will have to disappoint you again, at least for now, this moment, today. But since your time's up, you have plenty of it to spare, an infinity of it, so to speak. So relax. Cool it, as we used to say back in the day. The Attorney General has informed me that the district attorney has informed her, that the grand jury has informed him. It's raining cats and dogs. Obviously, the game must be postponed until weather is more propitious. You, the tall gentleman over there with his hand up, Mr. Brown, I presume. You have a question, sir? Yes, sir. How long? How long rain going to fall? I'm afraid I'm not a weatherman, sir. And besides, your question is out of order as well as irrelevant. You are dead, remember? I wrote that story, or I started that story maybe 2 months ago. And I kind of, there's certain things about it made sense to me, and so I sent it off. And it's going to appear in a magazine, Harper's, as just a small little story. But if you recall, at the beginning of it, there was a list of names, the Garners, and the editor called me up, said maybe it would make it more contemporary if you added a name. And he gave me a name, another man, another young man. And in the time since then, I've added Freddie Gray. So that, you know, and it just struck me. And of course I added that name today. But the story's in progress. The story's an old story, of course. Okay. That's amends. That's amends. And in a sense, I believe, now that I understand more about it, and that's why one writes, to try to understand more about the things that are going on in one's head and around one. Writing teacher is a companion piece to amends, or amends is a companion piece to writing teacher, and they're both probably companion pieces to Brothers and Keepers, and et cetera, et cetera. The beat goes on. Writing teacher, or writing teacher. I hear from my former students occasionally. A few have gone on to do remarkable things. I hear equally from the ordinary and remarkable. Requests for recommendations, announcements of new jobs, marriages, children, a photo, a copy of a book or film script, a story in a magazine or anthology, perhaps inscribed personally to me or sent directly from the publisher. Gift of book or story meant to break silence that settles in after they leave the university. The silence between us that being here, a student for a semester in my writing class, doesn't break. Silence of living ordinary lives we all endure, whether we do things deemed remarkable by other people's eyes or not. A current student wants to help, and I want to help her. Story she submitted to my fiction writing class, not very long, though quite ambitious. It wished to save a life. Her story immediately drops the reader inside the mind of its main character, a young woman of color, a few years out of high school, single, child to support, no money, shitty job, living with her mother, who never misses an I told you so chance to criticize her daughter's choices. Voice of the young woman narrating the story reveals her to be bright, articulate, thoughtful, painfully aware of how race, gender, age, poverty trap her. Worse now because a baby daughter trapped with her. Lack of understanding, not the narrator's problem. She's stifled by lack of options, lack of resources. What's a poor girl to do? My student's story, like the fictional young woman it portrays, begins and ends there, stuck in the midst of an apparently insoluble quandary. If the writer wants her fiction to offer useful advice and aid actual people outside it, if she desires her words to be more than just another dreary recital of a plight suffered by countless young, underprivileged women of color, more than just a well-intentioned display of good intentions. The story requires help. A desire to help, admirable, I think. And I will set aside for the moment my doubts. Perform the job I'm paid for. Concentrate upon being supportive. Commend strong passages, point out inconsistencies, transparencies, characteristic of an undergrad first draft, which after all, her story is. Console her that any story, undergraduate writer or Nobel laureate, begins life as a first draft. Her intent to help others, her attempt to step outside herself beyond a cloistered university world makes this young woman's story attractive to me, a welcome relief from student stories that jog along oblivious of other people's lives and troubles, the authors seemingly unaware that people quite unlike themselves exist, especially people whose skin, like mine, displays too much of the wrong color to be mistaken for the skin of an overwhelming majority of my students, including the author of this story in front of me, whose skin betrays no trace of colored people's color. Lucky for her, since her father, a bigot, she admits, and flat out despises colored people. Her mother different, she adds quietly. My mom taught me to respect people of all colors, she says. I don't ask, but can't help wondering which parent contributed more to her story's determination to help. Her story stuck, like most people's, like mine, like yours, because no place for it to go, except to explore the anguish of wanting things not to be the way they indisputably are. My effort to assist her must start there, where any person must start who wishes to help another. Start with oneself. Start with no expectation of success. Should I tell her that in order to help myself overcome the smothering inertia of helplessness, I'm currently reading biographies of Ludwig Wittgenstein and Catherine the Great, a novel, A Dream in Polar Fog about Chukchi Eskimos, Joseph McElroy's stories in the book Night Soul, contemplating retirement from my day job of college teaching, resisting the possibility age might retire me from fiction writing, coping with the likelihood neither my brother nor son will be released from prison anytime soon, negotiating with desire, strong as ever, though it less reliably elicits a hard-on to fulfill it, unlearning old school verities of time, space, memory, identity, while I shiver in the icy wind of the only certainty granted by a long, busy, precipitously up and down life, its absolute extinction. Of course, telling my story, not a fix for hers. Perhaps I could start our conference with a different story. Not mine, not hers, one less personal, though familiar to us both. For instance, Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tale about an emperor's invisible new clothes. Tell her I loved it the very first time I read it, or it was read to me. A colored boy hungry for books, for stories about lives that rescued him from the dismal poverty and unpromising future of his own. Confess to her my instant envy of the bold kid who exposes a naked emperor. Explain how Andersen's seductively simple fable has grown more complicated as I've aged. Its subject not a guileless, helplessly honest, innocent boy, not the foibles of a particular pitiful guy who happens to be emperor, but empire. Empire's irresistible power to enthrall, lobotomize, oppress, to ensnare us within our own fantasies, self-importance, willed innocence, errors, and terror. Let's undress your story, Ms. McConnell. Or is that invitation too suggestive for a teacher to propose to a student? Probably yes, because in fact I would prefer us both naked. Easier then to school her, drive home the truth that every story has ambitions to be an empire. Impossible to write a story without a naked little wannabe empire squirreled away inside it. All stories hiding places where writers pretend they are not who they are. Invent second, third, fourth selves, etc. Selves for a reader to play with while the author crouches in a corner playing with herself or himself. A self concealed, denied. Self, we are pretty sure, others scorn. Let's play it safer and stick close to the text. In its very first sentence, with its fifth word, my student's story addresses a you. The narrator warns you, the reader, would be pummeled by her daughter's tiny fists if she suddenly burst from the phone booth of her crib, masked, caped, armed with superpowers, all down and out unwed teen mothers daydream for their kids. To avoid this deserved beating, you, the reader, better listen up, the story instructs. Modify your attitudes, change your behavior, acknowledge your responsibilities to poor mothers and children. Surrender privileges which victimize people and drive them to strike back with punches, terrorist bombs. To identify the reader as the enemy, not a very wise strategy to start a story. Problematic at best. At worst, self-defeating. Reader bad-mouthed in a story's first line, same reader the story must endeavor to woo. The rhetorical you addressed in my student's first sentence, too indiscriminately inclusive, casts a net wide enough to catch her racist dad, her tolerant mom, me, you, people who sneer at reading fiction, curious people who happen upon her story and begin to read. No story able to help everybody. No story smarter than all its readers. Why alienate a potential audience? Nobody likes being called out or pronounced guilty without a trial. Lighten up, I remind myself. Don't sound like the narrator's carping mother. Playfulness, one virtue of my student's draft. Why shouldn't she start with a teasing, silly little joke at the reader? It's her move, not mine, her story. With no intention whatsoever to infringe upon writerly prerogatives, I often feel obliged to remind my students and myself that a person who decides to make up a story also makes up an audience. Word by word, a story welcomes some readers, shoos others away, paints faces on characters inside it and people outside, including the author, hovering precariously both inside and out. Intoxicated by the freedom of creation, the license to leapfrog at warp speed from one universe to another, it's quite easy and usually fatal for writers to lose sight of the world we pretend to leave behind. Assumptions necessarily in place to launch a story, to enfold and bind it together until the end, are never a done deal. Each next word of story stresses the believability of its initial assumptions. And writers, this one anyway, need to ask themselves as a fiction continues, where is this story? Where is it taking me? Who's along for the ride? Where will I be when the fiction concludes? If I'm the writing teacher and I sit writing this story, where is my student? Where is her story? Where is the young colored mother? Where are we? We, my student and I, sit at a small round table inside an office outside the story. An office set aside for me a few hours a week inside a university building. Outside the brick building, a large city spreads, and if this borrowed university cubicle owned a window, we could see whether snow still falls outside, as it was falling earlier this morning on a city that starts or ends at a wall of concrete, glass, and steel towers lining the sea. Inside this city is a house my student inhabits with her family. Not rich, not poor, not a colored family. So she's not a colored daughter falling between society's cracks. Unwed, broke, child to raise, stuck in a dead-end job, bills, and more trashy jobs to pay them until the end of time. No, that's definitely not her, according to the backstory my student Teresa McConnell recites as she speaks about herself for a moment. My curiosity, no matter how professorially, how gently I probe, an invasion of her privacy. So I won't pursue more than the little she volunteers. Story she's written for my class, enough. A story should reveal about itself all I need to know about it, all the author wishes me to know about her. We're not characters inside the story we sit and discuss inside this office. We only pretend we are. No one's life is at stake. Words on the page, the reason we are meeting. My students' words are what they are. Words. They contain the story, although you could just as appropriately suggest the story contains them. You could say the text is what I desire to help, or say that the fact she's written a text intended to help other people is why I want to help her. None of the above helps much, you might be thinking. World remains as it is. Resistant, opaque, you may also be thinking. And is the you I'm imagining the same you her story calls out in its initial sentence? One thing for certain I can say. My student's not the young brown woman inside the story. No one in the universe is that young colored woman. However, in one game a story can play, she exists. In another game, she doesn't. In another game, no game exists. Only you and I exist, and not for sure, not for long. Which game are you attempting to play? I could ask Teresa McConnell. Are readers supposed to pretend you exist or don't exist inside your story? Both? Neither? Are good writers able to help readers negotiate such issues? Does compassion trump technique, or technique trump compassion? Is it okay to borrow another's identity in order to perpetrate a good deed? If you don't obtain the other's permission, are you an identity thief? How many voices operate inside your tale, Ms. McConnell? What sorts of differences and distance distinguish these various voices. Are you speaking to someone, for someone, about someone, at someone? Do the best writers fret over such matters? In your story, do you desire to shrink distance and difference? Between who and whom? How much shrinking of distance and difference do you believe readers desire? How much are they able to bear? Bottom line, why are you performing a masquerade? Do you believe your disguise is working? Do you care if your mask slips, uncovers your face? I often worry mine's slipping. I believe we both care. So here, let's look together. Closer, Teresa. Right here on page 3, for instance, where your young woman's infuriated by a smug, smart-ass emergency room clerk who assumes the female in front of him, because she is young and colored, won't own health insurance to pay the doctor to sew up a bloody gash in her daughter's head. Why not have your young woman kill him and turn the story into that story? Show, not tell. Don't bother telling me or telling a young woman you are on her side and wish to help. She doesn't need that kind of help. She's quite as capable as you are of dealing with an obnoxious clerk. Besides, she's stuck much deeper than that. She needs more than words, your story says. So maybe chopping off the clerk's head, a way out of the story. A way to get outside yourself, too. Risk doing what you would never do. Then maybe the young woman will speak for herself, not speak for you. Speak with action, not words. Break free, break bad outside the story's boundaries. Nobody wrote John Brown's story. Nobody could pretend to be him or speak for John Brown or hate or love him until John Brown performed what he needed to perform. Until he smote his enemies in Kansas, perpetrated a bloody raid on Harper's Ferry to free slaves. No John Brown story, no John Brown, no Civil War until he showed the way, his way, war inside him, exploding outside. Who believes a person can experience what another person experiences? Who would we become if such an exchange possible? I wish I were in love with my student. Maybe it would be easier. Maybe for 30 minutes in this office, maybe during the moments I want to help her, I am. I do. And help myself. The pair of us celebrating the end of empire. Empire that traps us and neither of us loves. Of course we don't. We wait for it to tip over, fall down, and go boom. A vast, reverberating, silent crash, changing everything. Us, this office, university, city outside, nation inside which the city resides, nation inside the idea of empire, wrapped so carefully, strand by strand, silk and steel, cable of spider webbing wrapped round and round endlessly, a transparent cocoon holding everything inside, holding everything together until in one crystal clear instant we decide to say no. Nothing's there. The empire's naked. We are naked. We wait and wait for the moment to arrive. Wait for the time to celebrate, time to love. We understand empire's a bad idea. Same bad idea over and over again. We want to believe no empire outlasts the moment when the balance shifts, when its subjects see no point, no reason for empire, when they understand empire consumes rather than serves them, and they begin to gnaw at invisible cords, binding, trapping, gnawing at them. Empire sustains itself by devouring their live flesh. But in a flash, an instant of irrevocable reversal, they can devour empire, and it will be gone. Empire, a chimera, an old wives' tale. But inside the darkness of each mind, the idea of empire reigns, embedded like stories within stories, selves within selves, like identical Russian dolls, infinitely enclosed, one inside the other. Same face, same shape, over and over. Empire of ourselves consuming, being consumed. Empire dead, long live empire. Another empire arises. Our only way out of darkness, it seems, when empire fails. Or we chew on nothing, and nothing lasts a long, long time, as if empire is not dead, has not fallen. We dream, starve, die inside it, hope to survive as subjects of the next empire, saved from darkness by empire's light. So here we sit, my student, Teresa McConnell, and I, awaiting our liberation, our chance to help one another, to celebrate in this office, this moment. Free, it seems, though empire is inside us, in place, more powerful, more hungry, more implacable than any single one of us, as empire always will be. Anyway, point is, this story on the table is not mine. It's absolutely yours, I reassure my student. And you must always feel more than welcome, more than free, Teresa, to discard my advice, anybody's advice. She smiles. I think she's beginning to relax in spite of the uncomfortable surroundings, this unnatural exchange. I believe she senses my desire to help. Perhaps she's offering me what she expects for her story, for herself. What I expect. No more, no less than the benefit of the doubt. I repeat that I truly have no desire nor interest in seeing her change what she's written so it conforms to my ideas. Difficult enough, impossible enough, I say, to revise my own stuff. She nods and smiles again. On the table, her story still lies open to the third page, where a young admissions clerk consults a young, brown-skinned mother. Tomorrow, I confide, gazing up from her words until our eyes meet. Tomorrow, Teresa, I'm going to look into the possibility of obtaining a weapon. Haven't decided the best way to deploy it, if and when I get one, whatever kind of weapon it turns out to be. Arming myself, the first step. Figuring out the next step, the harder part. Scale, location, how to maximize what might very well be my only chance to inflict damage. Assassinate a sadistic prison guard, chairperson of a corrupt, merciless pardons and parole board, blow up a building, an airplane, hostages, raid Harper's Ferry. Your asshole clerk, I say, deal with him. Your way, Teresa, I say. Marry him, murder him, whatever. Your way, I reiterate. Then I'm careful to add, please ignore my crazy digressions, my playful revisions. They are not innocent as the baby fists in your story. Inside my head, the empire of my revenge topples and kicks up clouds of dust around my feet as it buries itself, words spoken and unspoken. I suppress my dream of power, the fantasy I might possess an idea to improve society, let alone possess the means to show any single person what she should do next. I revise, lean closer towards my student for emphasis. Your clerk, Teresa. This is the point, or rather, he's the point, where for me the energies within your story converge, crackle, glow. He's about your age, your social and economic class more or less, your color more or less, a color wisely or not, unspecified by your story, but hardly irrelevant, I'd guess, since you imply it's his color that inspires his ugly reaction to the young colored woman. I think, or rather my opinion, or rather what I feel is he's you. Something about you, about your father, your mother, me, inside that young guy who's able and willing to marshal hundreds of years of history of pillage, blood, suffering, and squash someone. Or try not to squash, maybe just contain, maybe sometimes loosen a little, or sometimes just squeeze the wraps slightly tighter to test, to practice controlling them, to exercise the bonds of empire, to make sure they are in place. The bonds of empire that hold together and make sense of everything. Of a moment in which he finds his job compels him to serve a young colored female who, by God, should expect nothing from him, who, on the contrary, should serve him, or at least make it apparent to him, always with humility and deference. She's well aware of the invisible strands of empire that allow her to believe she has a right to ask him for help and allow him to believe that during the moments he performs his numbing job, he's allowed to despise her, even abuse her, as he pretends to help her, so empire won't crash down on both their heads. Deal with him. Deal with that, Teresa, as I must deal with my responsibilities. I am a teacher, an elder, a subject, an inventor of fictions. My duty is to fabricate a life for myself from words, from these stories, these responsibilities. I must fit myself within my stories, fit so I'm comfortable, fit so I can breathe, fit so I can perform for my own good, and maybe, if things work out that way, for the good of others, fit to help myself, fit to help you. I poke out my hand to break silence as we both rise. Our chairs groan, chair noise. See you next week, Teresa. Maybe by then all the young people will have returned from war. Daily all over the nation, they are landing here and there in small airports and large. The smell of war still in their clothes, in their nostrils, blood dark on their hands, they furiously, secretly, silently scrub and scrub, like Lady Macbeth, wasn't it? I think. Maybe I'll teach Macbeth next semester, or something from Shakespeare anyway. The Tempest, perhaps, or Melville's Benito Cereno, or Ellison's Invisible Man, because what else to say to them? How to help? A few of these young veterans of war will receive a government bounty for school. And a few of that few might migrate to a class like yours, Teresa, this class in which you are seeking help to write a story to help others, story for a class in which my job is to help. Each returning veteran, including those killed in action, and the appalling number who die here, inside our country, each week, by their own hands, I see them drop into the stagnant pool of empire, an empire that's invisible and still because it's dead, far past the point of remission, so obviously drained of life once and for all, though we swim in its darkness, feed on its wastes, its unseen, rotting carcass. The young men, the young women and men back from combat zones, even those who return to these killing fields and stay alive only an instant before they are gone forever, each one disturbs the frozen quiet and glisten of empire. Each drop penetrates, agitates, and together they produce movement. Not the empire's dead, invisible carcass moving, something else moving, neither inside nor outside. Empire. Like a wave, an energy passing through, something that stirs and disappears as fast, it seems, as I locate, then lose the motion in a corner of my eye, in yours, your story. Where does it go? Where are they? The ones coming back from wars, jails, from being buried alive? Your young colored woman, her baby, that kid working at the hospital desk, you, your generation. I think we're all hungry, so we probably have our next move is very clear. But if there are any questions, or somebody else wants to read something or recite a poem, or I'll tell you one thing about this story. Again, how coming to Baltimore just brings so much into play, and other accidents of writing. As I was writing this story, and of course one theme is the danger, the worry of inciting someone else, and the danger of extremism. And when you're frustrated, what the hell can you do? But shouldn't you do something? And so the story is playing with that. The power of a teacher, the power of anyone. And if you recall, maybe the teacher tells the girl, cut off the clerk's head, which I thought was, extreme and made my point. But I'm a writing teacher, and I had a student once named James Foley. And if you remember who he was after all the other horrible executions in Iraq and Iran. But anyway, this story had been written, the first draft of it, I was going through it, and then suddenly that image came back to me. Is this what I want? Does that change anything? And I saw his face. And it wasn't a story anymore. It just leaped right off the page. left me kind of dizzy. But anyway, questions, observations, be happy to put up with them for a moment or two until anybody gets too hungry and wants to go. You can't start biting each other, no.
I do think we have a few minutes for questions before the next show.
And I'm sorry, they're both very loaded stories. They're not necessarily fun and games. They're not about fun and games, but I don't think these are very, well, they are fun and game times. We're going to have fun and games in just a few moments, but I realize these are the things that are on my mind now. I'm sharing them with you. They've been on my mind for a long time. Yes?
When did you start writing the writing teacher? When did you first start to draft the writing teacher?
The writing teacher, probably about a year ago, something like that. That question always makes me shiver a little bit, because I'm sure your students and writers, you know that somebody asks you, well, how long did a story take to write, or when did you write it? You know, this story may have begun when my grandfather had me on his shoulder walking down an alley in that place, Homewood, that Lee mentioned. That may be where the story began, really. And so you never know. You never know. But it's always a legitimate question.
Think about your references to the war. I was trying to think exactly which conflict. I mean, a number of conflicts. And I was trying to pinpoint which one you're talking about was the most recent, or the a couple of decades ago.
For me, that is not a specific time. I think we've been involved in wars since the Revolutionary War. We were born in it through a war, and when I write things, I'm thinking Civil War, I'm thinking Iraq, I'm thinking Afghanistan, and I really wanted to point to the general kind of chaos and danger that young people are exposed to. You can call it a war, you can call it drug addiction, you can call it the war of broken families, you can call it the war of poverty and no money. Those are all, to me, wars. And they send people off to jail. They trap people. They kill people. And folks never get over it. So it's all one struggle. And we're all in it, but it's particularly, I'm touched by the fact that young people are initiated into that kind of world. Always have been, I guess. Yes, sir.
You said that the story for you echoed back to Brothers and Keepers, and there's a moment in the book when you question your own ability to represent Robbie and Robbie's voice. And I'm wondering, is that what you were thinking about? Because I see the same kind of questioning in the writing teacher here of the writing student. Who are you representing? Can you create this other who's separate from yourself?
I've always been interested in that business, and the line is very direct in my work, as you pointed out. It's also very important to me that writing be intelligent, that it be self-aware, that the difference between a beach book often and one that has more ambition, I'd say, well, not necessarily, but is more complicated, is that you can't reduce the book that's not a beach book, or by definition, it's not something that's reductive. And it is aware of its own production. So I like to ask questions of myself and of other writing. How is this happening? How is this thing I'm involved in, this story or this novel, how does it work? And I find that self-consciousness an important part of the writing I read. And it can be in the writing not necessarily explicitly. I mean, as I read this story tonight, I thought, well, maybe some of the questions are too explicit. Maybe they ought to be buried. Maybe they go on a little. But that's my interest. Yes, it's always been. And I want stories to stay on the hook, not to get off the hook by saying, once upon a time, all bets are off. It's a story now. And you read it like a story. I want the writing to earn a place and keep earning it and talk about the place that it has in the mind of audience and individuals. That's why it's so important to me one of the reasons it's important to me to locate things in Homewood, in my family, in questions of what I think it means to walk around in the world for anybody to walk around in the world with whatever color they have, which is so crucial and comes from a certain history and family. But then that very intimate and personal factor gets kind of taken away and used against you. People make presumptions. People tell you what it's about. People tell you who you are. People assume that because you look this way or you don't look that way, certain things are true about you. And that's a beach book. The assumptions are too simple, too intrusive, too reductive. And so I want my fiction to challenge these kind of received ideas of all kinds. Actively challenge. Yes?
So the writing teacher keeps telling, I'm sorry, I forgot her name. Teresa keeps telling Teresa that it's her story, right? And, in preparing this week and other things that we do in districts, we talk about, teachers appropriating the voice of a piece when they give feedback. And the writing teacher makes a point of saying, this is your story, and yet it's not her story. And that tension, it makes me think, can we only speak for ourselves? Can we ever speak in another voice? And I just wondered if you think we can, authentically, in any way, ever.
I think the language is unfinished. I think the nature of language is like numbers. There's some concept, infinity. It ends somewhere or goes off the deep end somewhere. Well, I think language is the same way. And I think language is very dynamic. And one of the fun things about writing is if you write a story, you have a chance to expand the meaning of story. Because there's all those stories that have ever been written before, or all these words that have ever been spoken or written down. When you add one or add two, you have this enormous possibility. There's all that weight of language, all that weight of tradition, all that weight of expression. But you have a chance, when you speak out, to be whoever you are. And it's very important to me. And just 2 days ago, there was a kind of a protest in New York City, a march, one of a series of marches. And I didn't even know it was on. I just happened to see it out my window and went down to check it out. And it was a fairly large group, mostly young people, but quite a variety of people, all sorts of folks. Some people in kind of ISIS costumes. Some people looked like refugees from the 60s. Some people, just ordinary folk, looked like they'd come from whatever job they were doing. And they were expressing themselves. They were protesting. And I felt great. They have a chance. But all of them were walking inside of these barriers that the police had put up to contain the march. So, it just hit me. How is this protest a protest in the sense that it is? What is it if it's following this track? I didn't see anybody knock a steel barrier down. I saw everybody stop when one of the corridors stopped and a whole bunch of cops. Once there was this a momentary confrontation. But now what are you supposed to do? What would I didn't go over and grab a barrier and hurl it down and try to get the flow to go somewhere else. There were probably more policemen surrounding the marchers than there were marchers. And I mean thousands. Just so, is it all, what's going to change if somebody else sets the mold and we just follow it around? Well, literally that protest went in a circle. It didn't get to any, and finally it ended at the place where they let people fuss and have little speeches down near City Hall. But it couldn't go anywhere else. Not with all the opposition, not with the tracking. So these things are for us to sort out. I don't know how we're going to sort them out. We won't, and that's not important. The fact is we have to work at it. We can't just sit still. The next protest has to remember what happened before, and you do a little something else. You do a little something else. Maybe you walk up to a policeman and say, "Can we move this?" Maybe you'll get the right one. Good luck. But maybe.